Have you ever wondered what it's like to be a kid in medieval times? Kids in medieval times were just like you. They liked to play with toys and games with their friends. They wouldn't be playing with video games or with plastic toys that we might find in stores today. But if you like to play with dolls or action figures, if you like to play sports, and if you like to play active games on the playground with your friends at recess, then you have something in common with medieval children. Today we're going to learn how to play like medieval kids did. Today's toys are often geared towards boys or girls. But as we know, boys and girls' toys can be played with by everyone. And we don't always want to play only with one or the other. In medieval times, there were also certain toys for girls and for boys. To people in medieval times, what you played with had to do with what you would do when you grew up. For example, girls would be given dolls and toy dishes because the grown-ups around them wanted to teach girls to take care of children and how to cook and clean at home. Kids would learn a lot through playing just like we do, but in medieval times, they wanted boys and girls to learn specific things. Learning how to cook and clean and take care of children was meant for girls, and boys were encouraged to play with knight figurines and toy horses because they wanted boys to grow up and become strong like knights. Today, many different family members take care of kids and take care of our homes, not just girls. And we know strong people who aren't boys. But we still have toys like this that are shown in commercials for girls only or for boys only, like Barbies or Superman figures. Toys that are made related to gender is something that we have in common with medieval kids. If you ever wonder about why a toy at the store is only for girls or boys, you can think about how kids in medieval times might have been thinking the same thing when they watched their siblings play with different toys than them. It's hard exactly to tell how kids would play with their toys because they are often too old to be found. Cameras didn't exist in medieval times to take pictures and videos. So one of the ways that we've been able to find out how kids played is through what people have written about kids in medieval times, or by looking at pictures that they have drawn, like this one of children watching a puppet show. And here is part of a painting of medieval children's games by an artist named Peter Bruegel. This shows young girls playing with dolls and doll-sized furniture, and young boys playing with hobby horses. Here is a game inspired by this picture. People often use it to take a guess at how medieval boys would play with their knight toys and figurines. For this game, you need 2 dolls or figurines that are around the same height, and 2 pieces of string that are strong enough to hold your figurines under their arms. You'll also need a flat surface like a table or a space on the floor. And finally, 2 players. This game is similar to what you might know as Rock'em Sock'em Robots or Akado Warriors. To play this game, you'll set your dolls up facing each other. With your 2 pieces of string, you'll make an X between the dolls. It might be helpful to tie the ends of your strings to pencils, or we've used wooden dowels, just to keep them in place. When you're ready to play, lift and tuck the strings under your figure's arms. Then use your ends of the string to shake and move the dolls towards each other like puppets. Your knights are fighting. Whoever falls from their strings first is the losing player. It might be recess time in your school soon, or maybe you just are coming back from playing outside. Have you ever played tag with your friends or games on the pavement like hopscotch? If you have another thing in common with medieval kids. Medieval children played many games that were similar to group games we might play today outside, at home, or at school with our friends. Have you ever played Marco Polo in the swimming pool? In that game, you definitely have to be careful and play while a grown-up is watching. Well, medieval kids played a similar game that they called Blind Man's Bluff. They blindfolded one friend. That friend had to walk around feeling for their other friends and guessing who they were. If they guessed it wrong, they lost and kept guessing. But if they got it right, they would switch places with each other. This game would definitely be easy to get hurt or lost while playing it for medieval kids. And just like today, many kids get hurt while playing different games. If you've played hopscotch, you'll find this game interesting too. Hecka-beds was the medieval version of our game of hopscotch, but the rules were a bit more confusing. Kids would draw shapes out on the ground, just like us. But instead of seeing where the rock lands when they throw it and skipping over that square, They would make sure that they threw it in the first shape, and then they'd try and kick it back over the start line as they passed it, instead of reaching down to pick it up. Still careful not to touch any lines. Here's another game that medieval kids would play, and you can try it in your classroom or during recess. This one is a game like a game of tag, but with a little rhyme to say while you're playing. A game that you might think is similar would be, "What time is it, Mr. Wolf?" or "Red Rover." It's also similar to Octopus. It's called "How Many Miles to Beverlyham?" For this game, you'll need at least 2 players, but the more the merrier, and the lines to the poem to say while you're playing. It might help to print them out or have them on a chart paper around the room while you play. You'll need one person to be the chaser and the other or a group of players to be the ones who run and try not to get caught. The first player says, "How many miles to Beverlyham?" The second player says, 8, 8, and other 8. The first player says, "May I come there by daylight?" The second player says, "Yes, by God, if your horse be light." Player 1 then tries to run from their spot to another spot and back without being caught by player 2. And if they're not caught, they say, "Ha ha, petty pace, yet I am where I was." The words to this game might be a bit confusing to understand. The way people talked has changed throughout time. Our first player is asking the second player how long they think it will take from one spot to the next. The next player gives them a guess, and then they chase each other from that spot and back. And if the first player wins, they're saying, "Ha ha, I beat you there." Last but not least, let's talk about sports. There are many medieval versions of sports that we have today, like rugby, soccer, or football. One of the earliest versions of football was played in the medieval period. This version of football and other sports that we call invasion games, think about hockey or soccer, games where one team is trying to get to the other team's goal. These games were quite different than today because each team was likely wearing armor and carrying swords. They really took defense seriously in these games, and many players got hurt because of it. So many people got hurt from playing and being fans of these games that the games were often banned. The bans never really worked because we still have football today, but with many more rules for safety, of course. Another interesting fact about medieval invasion games was that they were most often organized by schools who would team up against each other to play the game. You might think this sounds familiar if your school has sports teams that compete against other schools. But there was one big difference, and that was that boys' education was seen as more important than girls'. While boys were sent off to school to learn all sorts of things for their future as knights or monks, girls may have been at home helping their mothers with chores or taking care of siblings. So not only girls would not be involved in sports, they wouldn't even be at the school that they took place. Today we're going to show you a version of a medieval invasion game that everyone in your class can play. What you'll need: 2 teams of at least 3, a pool noodle for each player. Half a pool noodle also works, or ball scoops would be a safe alternative. These will be players' medieval swords, used only to block opponents. You'll need 2 balls, 1 for each team. Balls to play medieval football were often made of pig's bladders, but a dodgeball or other soft ball alternative would work best. 2 goal areas. You can decide to use basketball nets, hockey goal posts, or whatever you have at school or at home, and a large enough area to run and move around. To play this medieval-inspired game, you have pool noodle swords that you will use to block your opponents from stealing your ball. Because we know how to play sports without needing to hurt one another, your sword is only to block anyone from being able to steal your ball. Each team should have some players defending their own goalposts and some who are trying to score points. The difference between medieval invasion games like this and invasion sports we play is that both teams had a ball, so they both were trying to score goals at opposite ends of the field at the same time. Play this game like you would a game of soccer or hockey, but you can be creative about how you get your ball from your end of the field to the other. Will you kick it with your feet and use your sword to block the opposing team's feet? Or will you pass it from teammates down the field by throwing or bouncing it like a football or basketball, using your sword to block opponents' hands? Get creative and see what is different about playing sports like they did in medieval times. Hopefully you've enjoyed playing like medieval kids and learning about what life was like for them. There are so many differences between modern life and medieval life, especially when it comes to being a kid. But there are also so many similarities. Maybe you'll continue to play the games that you learned about today, at school while you continue to learn about medieval times, or at home with your friends. Thanks for watching and learning with us.